Welcome to the Laverne Church of the Brethren's weekly audio message. Here at the Laverne Church of the Brethren, we create a Christian community called by Christ to be inclusive, caring, and peace-minded. We affirm that people of any race, ethnic identity, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, age, economic status, faith tradition, or life situation are welcome in our congregation. We believe in compassionate service, stewardship of creation, respect for diversity, and nonviolent reconciliation for differences among all people, nations, and faith traditions. We claim no creed but the New Testament as exemplified by the life of Christ. We strive to follow the way of Jesus. And through these efforts, we seek to grow ever closer to the mind and heart of God. And now let us ground ourselves as we enter into today's message.
On the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to the hands of sinners and be crucified and on the 3rd day rise again?" Then they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the disciples. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them.
A few weeks ago, I went thrifting with one of my kids. I had been in search of a specific item, and since I've been boycotting Target, I thought I'd try my luck at a few of my favorite thrift stores. At our 3rd stop, as we weaved our way through aisle after aisle, my son fell a bit behind me. I turned the corner and was scanning the shelves when I heard him screech loudly from the aisle next to me. "Mom! Mom! Is that God?" He ran to me, grabbed my hand, and pulled me to a shelf, and he pointed. There, resting on a rack amid cups and trinkets and fake flowers, sat a large wooden crucifix. Clearly disturbed, he asked his original question once again, "Is that God?" Now, I wasn't prepared for a deep dive into Christology, so I responded, "Well, yes, that's Jesus." Confused, he asked me why there was blood, why Jesus looked so hurt, and most importantly, he wanted to know who was responsible for this violence. "Who did this to God?" he demanded. I reflexively spouted that the government did this to him. So he asked, "Well, who's the government? Who's the government and why did he do it?" And so there, with people all around, in my best kid language, I explained that Jesus' radical love and generosity threatened the powers that be. That because of his radical way of living, many wanted him gone. That yes, he was hurt and he died. But then I shared with him that the story doesn't end there, that 3 days later, Christ rose from the tomb. This seemed less interesting to my first grader for some reason. Our conversation quickly veered from Christ to tombs and caves, and before I knew it, he was asking me if we could visit a cave someday. As we drove home together, I smirked to myself as I thought about this deep theological conversation we engaged in together. Perhaps it was a bit of practice for this morning. What I shared with my son is what I find inspiring about the Christian faith, that we align ourselves with Jesus, with his subversive life that questioned the status quo. He flipped hierarchy on its head. He said the first would be last and the last would be first. He pursued the way of nonviolence, refusing to wage war or fight back against those who were opposed to him. He shared food and health care. He called out injustice. His life was a disruption, a threat to the religious and political elite, so much so that they had him detained and killed. Yet just as I reminded my young son under the fluorescent lights of the middle of a Goodwill, the story does not end there. The story does not end with an image of Jesus on a cross. For today, we join together in a centuries-old tradition to celebrate what we heard in our Luke text this morning: Christ is risen. In Luke's narrative, a group of women, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Mary, mother of James, are the first to bear witness to the good news of the empty tomb. They were not strangers to Jesus, for they had supported his ministry financially and they had followed him. Luke tells us when Jesus died at the hands of the government, these women stood at a distance and watched his last breaths. Even in his death, their loyalty and love remained, for it is these women who followed a Jewish man named Joseph as he wrapped Jesus' body with linens and laid his body in a tomb, an act of dignity and care. After they saw where his body was placed, these women went to prepare ointment and spices to honor him. They too desired to offer dignity in his death. When the Sabbath was over, the women returned to the place where they had seen Jesus laid to rest. They came expecting to anoint a lifeless body, but they found no body at all. Instead, they met two dazzling figures, presumably angels. Overcome with emotion, the women fell to the ground as the angels asked, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" Then the angels reminded them of what Jesus had told them. Remember how he said while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners, be crucified, and on the third day rise again. The words of the angels jogged their memories. They had an aha moment. So they rushed to spread the good news, first to the disciples. Out of breath from running, exhilarated by what they had just witnessed, they told the disciples of the empty tomb. And the disciples' response? These words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. The disciples could not bear to believe the miracle of the resurrection. Interesting to me is that the word for idle tale is found just one time in the scriptures, here in the context of the empty tomb. And its meaning is foolishness, empty talk, nonsense. The resurrection, arguably the most celebrated event in Christian history, is dismissed as foolishness, as empty talk, as nonsense, and by Jesus' closest followers, no less. Maybe some of us can relate. Is this story fiction or nonfiction? Did Jesus return at all? Some debate whether Jesus returned in the flesh or maybe in spirit. We aren't quite sure what to make of the story. How and why should we celebrate the seemingly nonsensical talk of the resurrection? Yet we're surrounded by many idle tales, by people, by history and experiences that seem far-fetched and even absurd. And sometimes what we dismiss as nonsense turns out to be more real than we imagined. In my home, we have an ongoing inside joke, no longer to be an inside joke. It's about narwhals, creatures that are often called the unicorns of the sea. These whales are known for their pointed spiral tusk atop their heads. One day in the middle of a family conversation in the living room, I was shocked to learn that narwhals are real. I thought they were mythical, like the unicorn, just part of a whimsical story. My kids, they try to convince me otherwise, but I wasn't having it. So we Googled it. And to my surprise, I learned that these fantastical creatures do exist. Narwhals are alive and well, swimming in the Arctic Sea. We had quite a laugh together, but it was a reminder to me how easily I can dismiss things as nonsense or outrageous when their existence is quite real. And it's not just sea creatures. History is full of stories that sound impossible. Take South Africa, for example. During apartheid, the government legally divided the country by race, oppressing Black and Indian communities, stripping them of rights and enforcing their separation with violence and brutality. In the face of this injustice, activists and leaders rose up to resist. Nelson Mandela was one of them. For his efforts, he was sentenced to 27 years in prison, nearly 3 decades, enduring hard labor year after year after year. And yet, he was eventually released and went on to become the first Black president of South Africa. I can't help but wonder if, after all those years, could he have possibly fathomed what was to come? Talk about an idle tale. And speaking of institutionalized segregation, the United States suffered and still suffers from the evils of Jim Crow. Many civil rights activists worked toward what, at the time, seemed like an idle tale. King's dream was just that, a dream. Activist and author Adrienne Maree Brown writes that before the civil rights movement, showing Black and white people sitting at a lunch counter together was science fiction. Desegregation was once deemed as foolish. These idle stories that some call unbelievable and nonsense, I think we must cling to, for they remind us that the impossible is possible. And isn't that what the resurrection is about, that the impossible is possible? For even though the political and religious elite tried their best to end the Jesus movement, they failed. Because not even death can stop the movement of God at work in the world. Perhaps these idle tales act as an invitation. Maybe they invite us to listen for and live into the so-called nonsensical tales of our time, ideals that some call empty talk and foolish. Perhaps they give us permission to imagine a society where every person receives the care they need, where healthcare is a right, not a privilege. to work for a world where poverty is no more and no child goes to bed hungry, to dismantle systems of oppression in our nation and create a society where equity isn't just a word we use, but it's realized among us. To become communities where every single person is treated with dignity and there are no exceptions. So today, as we celebrate the risen Christ, let us hold on to the seemingly impossible, nonsensical tales. Let's remember narwhals, those strange, whimsical creatures that are indeed real. Let's remember Mandela, who after nearly 3 decades in prison experienced liberation and went on to lead his country. Let's remember lunch counters, where not long ago the sight of Black and white folks eating together was considered science fiction. And yet today we live in the legacy of those brave enough to imagine otherwise. Let us remember the empty tomb, where women showed up to grieve and instead became the first witnesses to the resurrection, to the good news that love had not been defeated, that Christ could not be squashed or silenced by religious or political leaders. Because these stories, these idle tales, they're anything but idle. These are tales of resistance, of hope, and of holy possibility. They remind us that justice is not a far-off dream, that peace is not a fantasy, that love cannot be destroyed. For though they said it was an idle tale, Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen. We're so glad that you listened to the message today. If you're looking for an open and affirming, peace-loving, and justice-seeking congregation, consider visiting us for in-person worship on Sundays at 9:30 a.m. We'd love to meet you.